Good evening, viewers. Today I want to examine the housing sector and our land policy. The land policy that supports our housing development is a key document. And what our land policy seeks to do is to divest ownership of land to Guyanese of every walk of life. You would recall that the housing sector over the last 4 years would have seen massive investment in infrastructure, in development, in land allocation, in regularization. In the last 4 years, we have allocated more than 40,000 plots of land and pieces of land from the Ministry of Housing alone across the country. When you look at the total acreage of lands that has been divested directly into the hands of ordinary Guyanese, more than 40,000 of those Guyanese, families, young professionals. When you look at the total acreage that was developed and divested into the hands of these Guyanese, as against the acreage that would have been allocated for private development or for development by private developers. That allocation for private developers and commercial purposes is less than 10%, of the lands allocated for the housing and house lots. And there's an important fact that we must understand. The resources generated from the sale of land to private developers for development purposes, because I will go through with you the conditions through which those sales are made, for development purposes, for investment purposes, for transformation of the housing stock. The resources from that is used to cross-subsidize investment for low-income, middle-income, and low-middle-income properties. The concept of cross-subsidization in the housing sector is a key one. That is why, with the government investment, with the cross-subsidization, we're able to subsidize heavily the house lot that is delivered to the ordinary person. And if you look at the agreement that we signed with private developers, regardless who the developers are, first of all, there's a process. There was an expression of interest. Private developers would have had the opportunity to respond to that expression of interest, and all of the developers would have signed the same agreement. I will go through with you how lands were divested between 2015 and 2020, and to show to you that, first of all, in some instances, no agreement, no payment. In disagreement under the People's Progressive Party civic government, no land can be transferred or vested without the full payment. And that's not all. If you look at the condition, you will see that there must be the installation of drainage, including concrete drains, irrigation roads, including internal roads and street lighting, within 18 months of the date of this agreement. Further, substantial completion or substantially completing 70% of the residential construction within 3 years of the date of the agreement. Not only within 18 months, they have to substantially complete all the infrastructure, but within 3 years, 70% of all the residential construction must also be completed. It goes further to say, of course, the purchase price for all of the developers is $30 million per acre and 30% deposit upon signing of the agreement. The balance of the purchase price shall be paid to the vendor within 18 months. That will be paid to CHPA within 18 months of the date of this agreement, And further, not only payment must be made, and the substantial completion of infrastructure works, at which time, only at that time, title to the property shall be passed to the purchaser. So none of these developers would have title until all of these conditions are satisfied. And if they don't satisfy the condition, that we go further. This is the agreement we signed. If the infrastructure works are not substantially completed within 18 months, the vendor, that is CHPA, shall be under no obligation to accept the balance of the purchase price and convey title to the purchaser, and may, at this point, terminate the agreement, and not only terminate the agreement, and retain 30% of the deposit. That was the agreement. This is the agreement we signed. Further, ownership of the property will be transferred in the name of the purchaser on publication of the sale in the official gazette. Nothing in secrecy. All will be transferred on publication of the sale in the official gazette, payment of the entire purchase price, and full satisfaction of the terms and conditions stated in the agreement. And I give you some of the terms and conditions. That is the level of and the strength of the agreement that they signed. Let us look at some of what took place between 2015 and 2020. And some of the very characters Nigel used participated in these transactions, some of these transactions. The party that he leads, the APNU-AFC, were in government when these transactions were entered into. Compare the transparency and openness of this agreement with what I'm going to outline to you. When you look at the east coast of Demerara, let's look at the east coast of Demerara first. On July 2020, under the APNU-AFC government, this was after the elections, after they knew they lost the elections. 23 transactions for the sale or lease of land at Plantation Ogle, Chatamargo, and Little Souvenir on the came through any public process. In some instances, board representations were made. There was no public tender or expression of interest. The 23 transactions were entered into after the APNU-AFC government was defeated by a vote of no confidence on the 21st of December 2018 in the National Assembly. More importantly, they were finalized mere days and hours before the general elections of 2nd of March 2020 and vested further, and they were vested after the general election date as well. Vested after the general election date as well. Vested by who? The APNU AFC. It gets worse. Most of these transactions, most of the 23 transactions, guess what? They collected less than 10% of the total purchase price. Less than 10% of the total purchase price. This is the highest land, the highest value land in the country. In our agreement, we collected 30% as a down payment with a series of conditions that must be satisfied. They collected less than 10%, and in some instances, vested the property in the purchaser name with less than 10%, with no conditions being met. In some instances, collect no money and give the purchaser the land, and then give them 90 months to complete the development. In 7 instances, 2 of the applicants never even paid a lease fee of tens of millions of dollars. Never paid the lease fee. 16 of them entered into an agreement of sale. The lands valued more than $5.6 billion and only paid $700 million. $700 million. 5 applicants made no payment to the state of Guyana for lands valued more than $3 billion. And the APNUFC has the audacity to speak about land policy and land development policy. Let me go further. 9 of the 16 agreements of the 23 were vested between February and June 2020, after the general elections. That was how callous they were. And Nigel Jews cannot claim ignorance because his foreman, he participated in some of the negotiations. Of the 9 vested, only 2 paid in full to the state. Can you imagine this? Then you had another 7 vested transaction that only paid $44 million when the total purchase price or value was $2.8 billion. And land vested. Vested. This is the reality. Let me take you to the east bank of Demerara. Plantation Peters Hall. We did 23 on the east coast. When you add up all of this land, unlike the PPP land policy, where less than 10% of the total lands developed for housing goes to private developer at stringent conditions. For a matter of fact, all the lands that we've allocated, regardless of who gets it, Once they breach this agreement, CHPA has already know that they have to move towards repossession. Everyone is subject to the same condition. Let's go on the East Bank, Peters Hall. 22 transactions for leased land. A plantation, Peters Hall, was entered into by the APNU AFC government. The lease transaction had a minimum term of 20 years and 25 years, a minimum term. Again, the government never invited, through public offer or expression of interest, any submission for these lands. The people were handpicked. No process. There existed no board representation. No board decision. The lease agreement were prepared by an attorney not retained by NISIL. Yes, sir? The lease agreements were prepared by an attorney not retained by NISIL. The lease agreements were executed between the 1st of May 2018 and the 11th of November 2018. The lease rentals carried nominal value for the primest of state lands. For example, and the value varied. Everybody had a different lease price and lease value. For a matter of fact, when you look at what these lands were leased at, it is just 12,000 Guyana dollars per month. 12,000 Guyana dollars per acre per month in Peters Hall, along what is now the Heroes Highway and all the lands around there. That was the lease fee. 12,000 Guyana dollars. That was the lease fee. The lease agreements. In all our agreement, there's a restrictive clause in favor of the state that protects the land. However, in this agreement by NISIL, that clause was taken out. It was omitted, and it permitted them to transfer, sublet, or reassign the leases. Can you imagine? They own the land invested to them. They paying 12,000 per acre per month. And they got the permission. They take out the protection of the land. And they give these leases the approval to sublet, to rent, to transfer, to do whatever they want to do. As a matter of fact, we had to go to court because in some instances, this land that was never vested in these people's name were entered into agreement of sale. Were entered into agreement of sale. Of the 22 transactions, only 11 leases made any payment as of the 31st of July 2020. This was over 211 acres of prime commercial land I'm telling you about. Over 211 acres of prime commercial land. As of July 2020, only 36 million Guyana dollars was received in lease rental against property valued $10 billion. Hear what I just tell you? That is what they must answer for. The APNUFC. $36 million of lease fees received for land valued more than $10 billion. I'll go on. Let's take, I have a list of all the transactions. Let's move on to Linden, Region 10. NISIL undertook 148 agreements of sale transaction in the town of Linden. They did not invite, through public offer or through expression of interest, anyone. They handpicked. There was no board representation. There was no valuation. No valuation. And the agreement of sale were executed between December 28th, December 2018, and the 28th of February 2020. The sale agreement executed included members of parliament, executive members of the parties in government at that time. We came back and we are regularizing thousands of house lots now through NISIL and CHP in the same area for ordinary Lindeners. Out of the 148 agreements, 81 were vested. Out of the 81 vested, no payments were received from 44. And of the 81 agreement of sale vested, a total of 21 purchasers made partial payment. This is the facts. And out of the 81 agreement of sale vested, only, remember, out of the 148, 81 was vested. Out of the total 148, only 16 of them made payment. 81 of the land vested. Let's look at, I don't want to bore you this evening. I'm just giving you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's look at NISIL in Wales, the senior staff compound. NISIL undertook 15 transactions of the sale of land and building at Wales Estate, the senior staff compound. There was no public offer or public tender. Between the 4th of March 2018 to the 11th of May 2018 for the sale of lots 1 to 12 and 14 to 31. However, bids were not received for all the advertised lots. So they had some lots advertised, some not advertised. Sale agreements were executed with various individuals. There existed no board approval for the sale of 6 lots. No board approval. Let's go on to see what happened. As of the 31st of July 2020, the total annual lease rental at Wales was 8.9 million. That was what was due. However, only just over 3 million was received. The lease agreement were executed between March 2019 and December 2019. The lessees, lessees were allowed to occupy the senior staff compound and access the leased land with no payment or minimal payment. The lease rentals carried nominal values for the land and building at the senior staff compound. This is the reality. All the transactions we have here. As of July 31st, 2020, the total annual lease rental was 27 million. However, less than 35% was paid. Less than 35%. Not only did they have a very low lease fee or rental that they had to pay, but less than 35% of it was paid. The monthly rental ranged from between 25,000 Guyana dollars to 100,000, with the majority being a nominal rent. 4 of the 18 leases made no payment, but were still allowed to access and take the property. This is what we're dealing with. Compare that to the rigid agreement that developers sign on us. And what do you see? Drive around the new hotels, the new housing development, and it is less than 10% of the total land developed for housing. All of the resources go towards cross-subsidization. On the other hand, when you examine what was achieved by the APNU AFC, you will see absolutely nothing. For a matter of fact, more lands went into these type of arrangement that I just outlined, rather than for ordinary Guyanese for housing. And let me give you some facts here. It's important that we understand the evolution of the housing sector. According to a study by the United Nations in 1999, it was estimated that 108,000 people lived in squatter settlements during the early 1990s. This is the UN. 108,000 people lived in squatter settlements. In 1992, the PPP was voted in office. And what confronted the PPP was the highest housing deficit ever in the region. Immediately, notwithstanding we're a highly indebted poor country, focus and priority went towards housing. Remember, this was a time when the total debt to GDP ratio was 750%. 94% of the country's revenue was used to service that debt. In 1992, 43% of the population lived in absolute poverty. The incidence of extreme poverty in rural interior was more than 70%. For a matter of fact, the World Bank estimated that the poverty rate in Guyana, measured as a percentage of people living on less than $5 per day, was 85%. 85%. That was in 1992. Upon taking office, the PPC government inherited a country grappled in this worst crisis. Post-1992, in 5 short years, between 1993 and 1998, the PPP was able to regularize, invest, and allocate more than 21,000 house lots under these economic and social pressure. period 2004 to 2014 saw tremendous investment and acceleration of the housing program. During this period, the government invested over 30 billion in the housing sector. 30 billion, increasing its investment by threefold in the housing sector between 2004 and 2014. As a result of these investments, housing stock increased from 154,000 in 1991 to 220,000 by 2012. More than 43% increase in the housing stock. And in every single region, in region 10, a 37% increase in housing stock. Region 3, 66%. Region 5, for every single region, there was increase. In 2015, the PPP government distributed more than 100 and allocated more than 115,000 house starts by 2015, by the time he left office. And all of these, the majority of these lots, were distributed at highly subsidized prices. But much more importantly, we regularized 153 squatter settlements. You know what happened between 2015 and 2020 when we came back into government? When we came back into government, we found 16 new squatter settlements. That is what they achieved. 16 new squatter settlements in their period. That is their housing legacy. 14 of which are on zero tolerance area. According to the Housing Policy and Implementation Strategy of 2012, the wealth transfer to beneficiary of government house lot under the PP civic government was $23.9 billion between 2000 and 2012. That was a wealth transfer to ordinary Guyanese. I have a lot more I want to share with you. Let us look at 2015 to 2020. The PNC in its new incarnation, APNU-AFC, what they did for housing. What is the first thing they did? They disbanded the Ministry of Housing. You forgot this. Housing is important for them. They disbanded the Ministry of Housing and made it a department of the Ministry of Communities. In their entire period, they delivered 16 new squatting settlements, 16 new squatter settlements, and just about 8,000 house lots in 5 years. They limit the mortgage interest relief to $15 million, impose VAT on everything, including building materials. That is what they did. That is their legacy. Since we came back in office in 2020, the PPC government has allocated more than $240 billion to the housing sector. We have regularized 17 squatter settlements. Not give you a new one. We have regularized 17 squatter settlements. And we have developed and allocated in less than 4 years more than 40,000 house lots at highly subsidized prices. Additionally, 128,000 citizens would have benefited from the improved shelter from our house lot allocation since 2020. The total subsidy or wealth transfer to the beneficiaries of the house lots is approximately $94 billion. The government increased the mortgage interest relief from $15 million to $30 million. To date, Approximately 16,180 homeowners have benefited at a total cost of more than $2.6 billion, went back directly into their pockets. The interest rate came down by 2.5 percentage points, while the increase in the new building society ceiling went from 12 billion to 20 billion. 12 billion to 20 billion. You have constructed more than 3,222 homes at a value that exceeded $11 billion. Further, we have embarked on the construction of more than 3,400 homes. We have removed VAT on locally produced building and construction material. We have expanded housing in the hinterland. We have issued more than 1,300 vouchers. Interest rate fell at an all-time low between June 2020 and 2024. Real estate mortgage disbursement by new building society increased by 65%, from 27 billion to 70 billion. 5 times the increase recorded under the APNUFC. This didn't happen by accident. This happened by a well-thought-out land policy, a well-thought-out housing policy. Real estate mortgage loans from commercial banks increased by 58%, from $88.7 billion to $140 billion. These are not accidental accomplishments. These are because of the investment and the way in which we have managed the land resource of our country. As I said before, the facts are here. And we have even moved further to the homestead program for single mothers, where we're developing modern housing settlement at Yarrow Cabra, located in Region 4, to accommodate at least 500 units, benefiting mostly single mothers from Region 4 and 10. 100 acres of land is used for this. The area will be subdivided into 500 lots, measuring 100 feet by 50 feet. Beneficiary will pay less than $100,000 per lot. They will also be out, these lots and housing unit will also be outfitted with a 680 square foot shade house to supplement their income, improve their disposable income, and they'll be able to generate income to support their loan repayment. So on housing, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I have much more to share. Much more to share that I'll be sharing with you in the coming days. But to listen to some of these commentators, given their track record, given their history, lack of transparency and accountability is most interesting. So I had an obligation to draw your attention to the facts. Let me turn to another subject area. As you know, the government, Linseca, and their partners went to the DAB for a resolution. The DAB is a mechanism, the first in a series of mechanisms to deal with contract dispute in the gas to shore project. Both the government and company are bounded by confidentiality clauses in relation to the ruling and outcome of the DAB. The DAB would have made certain recommendations, and the government at the moment is having discussions with its legal team, specialists, of course Exxon, that had responsibility to oversee the building of the heavy haul road and the MOF, to determine our next step in this process. As you know, either party may go to arbitration as part of the process itself. Because of the nature and the rules, I cannot comment at this point on the ruling of the DAB, but what I can say is that this is one of the first steps in the process whereby either party can go to arbitration. So we are examining all our options, taking the best advice from the legal team, and of course, looking at each partner and what their responsibilities were in completing this project. Our focus is to ensure that this project is completed and that the benefits of this project, must and will be realized and enjoyed by the people of this country. This remains one of the most transformative projects that would not only support cheap electricity costs, but one that will play an important role in the economic transformation and diversification, in the building out of our industrial manufacturing, agro-processing and agricultural hub, but also, importantly, the development of a transport and logistics infrastructure that will connect us with the rest of the regional markets. So, as we continue the evaluation, I will definitely update the population on the steps or next steps we will be taking. I thank you for sharing your time with me this evening, and you can look forward towards a government that will continue to work hard every day in your interests as we build a stronger, more resilient Guyana. Thank you.